Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills are the videos where I talk about books that I have recently finished reading. If you're new to my channel, I don't really call these discussions book reviews. Really, they're more informal discussions. My videos are unscripted, they are informal, and I just kind of ramble for a while about things that I thought of while I was reading books. And I have some interesting kind of pagan selections today. That's going to be the theme of today's video. It's been quite a few weeks, actually, since I filmed any videos. I'm essentially, with these reads, catching up on the things I read in January. And here it is the first week in March as I film this. Now, part of it has just been, I've been incredibly busy. The other thing has been the kind of disastrous political situation in the United States has been very distracting to me. And, the time that I generally would have spent by maybe making videos or even watching booktube, a lot of that has taken a back seat to, basically keeping abreast of the crazy political situation that we have going on here. Life in terms of busyness is kind of slowing down a little bit. I can catch up with things, and I actually had some time today on Sunday to get some filming in. So I figured I have the attention right now and the time, I might as well try and get it done. So apologies for the very long wait in videos, but this is just a hobby. So I do it whenever I can and when I feel like it. So yes, I'm going to be talking first about 3 pagan-themed books that I read in January. So we have, they're not in the order that I read them, but here is Norse Paganism and Mythology. It's actually 3 books in one. We've got Round We Dance and Elves, Witches, and Gods. Now, again, if you're new to my channel, I am not generally a sort of pagan or witchy channel. I am a booktube channel, so I just talk about the things that I'm reading. I should probably lay out my cards on the table when I'm talking about things like this. So I, grew up in a very sort of relaxed Christian setting, Catholic setting, but I realized in my teen years that I didn't believe that I was an atheist. So from my teens all the way up into my, I'm in my mid-40s right now, I could most accurately be described as a secular humanist. And I still, on most days of the year, would describe myself as that. That's sort of my default mode. However, in the last few years, I have had some shifting perspectives, especially as it refers to my approach to religion and what I think about it. Certainly throughout my sort of teens, my 20s, and for most of my 30s, I was probably more of the anti-theist bent. Something, I guess, more akin to what you call new atheism. I wasn't that way because of new atheism. I was pretty anti-theist before we had those books come out and those figures. But I've softened a lot more to ideas like ritual. And essentially, you hear people say, oh, well, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. I'm interested in the other way around. I'm interested more in, can you be religious without being spiritual, especially without any kind of supernatural beliefs? Now, certain things about paganism have really attracted me. It's not the, most pagans are polytheists. I'm still an atheist. And also witchcraft kind of goes under this umbrella sometimes too. And I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in any kind of supernatural. What I am interested in is how ritual can be worked to enrich our lives and to focus our attention on things that we want to focus our attention on, maybe things that we feel are important in life. And that's what it was for me. So I found myself, I still have very, very kind of scientific point of view, but I found that the secular humanist life that I was living, I was forgetting to do certain things that I thought were important. I wanted to pay closer attention to the passing of the seasons. I wanted to think about, ancestors more and talk about them more with my children. And I've always loved myth and folklore, and I wanted ways to sort of bring that into my life in a kind of very rational way. And I've always had an affinity for Norse cosmology. All this is to say that over the past year or so, I've been kind of incorporating pagan practices, not, again, without any kind of supernatural belief, but things to mark the season, like adopting aspects of the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, and some other sort of more Norse pagan specific holidays that I've done and sort of adapted to my own way of thinking. So when I am looking at these sorts of books, what I am thinking about especially is ritual. How is ritual being played out? How is it incorporating myth and folklore? And what sort of personal, maybe transformative experience can it create? Whether you believe or not. So I don't believe in a lot of the things that these authors say, but I'm not reading these things to, tear it apart or to find holes in it. I'm looking for certain particular things. So just understand that going into this conversation. I said at the very beginning, my videos are very, informal and unscripted and not exactly reviews. So now that you kind of know where I'm coming from, we'll talk about these. And I'm not going to talk about them in the order that I read them in, but I guess in the order that most makes sense. So starting with this most closely defines, I guess, where I am as far as pagan practice. So this is Round We Dance, Creating Meaning Through Seasonal Rituals by Mark A. Green. Now, Mark A. Green, he began a pagan, I'm not sure what you would call it, a pagan subset called atheopaganism. So it's an atheistic form of paganism. And that is, again, pretty much what you could mostly use to describe what I am at this point when I am doing those sorts of celebrations. So it is pagan practice, pagan ritual, without any sort of supernatural belief. And, he is doing this for the same reasons that I had expressed, to mark the seasons, to, celebrate moments in our lives, to, find ways to kind of play and bring joy. And that, of course, is very attractive to me. So I have been aware of atheopaganism for quite a few years. Now, I don't always call myself an atheopagan because, I do kind of have this kind of heathen Norse pagan flavor that I do to a lot of these things. So and I guess I'm a little bit more comfortable with bringing old world myth into my practice more than is kind of promoted in here. But essentially what we have is, I would say this is less a guide for the solitary practitioner and more like a handbook for those who would like to get into sort of like an atheo-pagan, clerical role, or who want to form and run their own groups. So that seems to be kind of a little more what this is geared towards, for people who want to organize with others, individuals. And it's sort of a little bit of a how-to, and it kind of just, skims the surface on a lot of these things. But it goes to, basically being aware of certain group dynamics, even like end-of-life sort of rituals that can be done from an atheopagan perspective. And along the way, he gives a lot of different tips and advice. Let's look through the table of contents. I think it's been over a month since I read it. We've got, I want to pause, you can see the table of contents. We've got spirituality, about rituals, ritual basics, a practice for yourself, ritual skills, ritual arts. We've got occasions for celebrating rituals, rites of passage, working with the dead and dying, personal and healing rituals, building community for sharing rituals, beyond rituals, life is spiritual life, welcome to the journey, etc. And I found a lot of value in this. A lot of this stuff I was already doing. It gave me some ideas for new ways to approach things. And, there's certain things that I knew didn't fit with me. But it's interesting, I think, to read things in here that are spoken of in a much more psychological way, whereas in other books, like for instance here, they are spoken of in a much more supernatural, spiritual way. So with that in mind, we can kind of take a look at this. So this is Elves, Witches, and Gods, Spinning Old Heathen Magic in the Modern Day by Heath. Now, she is looking at, basically, what we have here is like a combination of Norse paganism, or heathenry, with traditional witchcraft. She assumes that people are familiar with both those things, okay, with traditional witchcraft and with Norse paganism. And I was really interested to see how those two things can come together. I had read a few months ago The Crooked Path by Karlsson about traditional witchcraft. So I wanted to see, in a Norse pagan setting, how does this work? How does it function? What sorts of symbolism does it bring in? And I will say, I was overall impressed by what Heath has put together here. She focuses mostly on the goddess Freya. Now, she is a polytheist, so, I we part ways there. But again, I'm looking at these deities more from a archetypal level. I see them as embodiments of certain aspects that we would like to focus on. I even have, this season, I do have a little, you could say altar, but I've adopted the Aethiopagan terminology of focus for it. That's really what you're doing. You're focusing on something. So I have a seasonal focus. And I put a little figure of Freya on there to embody fertility and things like that. So I'm familiar with the goddess and her interpretation of Freya in this. She associates Freya with Seether, the magical practice, and especially, spinning, the kind of practice using, it's been a few weeks since I read it, but threads and spinning wheels and the sorts of tools that a Volva might use, an Old Norse magical practitioner. And her interpretation also of Freya is to associate her with a fairly mysterious figure that we find in the Poetic Eddas, especially the Völuspá, where we see a figure named Gullveig, if I'm remembering this correctly, seems to be sort of a witch archetype or witch figure who goes to the Aesir, the gods, and this figure is burned alive 3 times, and each time they rise again, and they seem to become another figure. And we seem to see a sort of witch figure in this. And some scholars have linked that figure with Freya, saying that is probably the same figure. Not all of them agree, but she takes the path of saying, yes, that is Freya, and extrapolation and looking at these things, using this goddess as, and she also talks about Odin as well, but given all these different sources, what can we pull? What sorts of modern day witchcraft can be practiced to be as close to what they did back then as possible, but knowing, of course, that you are creating something ultimately new. And I thought that she did a good job with this. I know that was very rambly of me in speaking. I will say that her sources are excellent. She uses almost exclusively scholarly sources, and the things that she it's fascinating for me to see somebody look at these scholarly sources and these old texts as well and create something new, create a new craft, a new art that is, personal and transformative and inspiring. That's what I'm fascinated by with this sort of thing, especially when I look at witchcraft. Since I don't believe in magic, I don't see spells as necessarily, transferring energy or something. I see them as personal rituals. And this gave me a lot of, really kind of interesting things to think about. The approach overall made sense, especially if you take that interpretation of Freya. But, again, you see she has things in here like going under the cloak, which is something that seems to have been practiced in some way in Old Norse times, even though we're not entirely sure exactly what happened. But what she describes as going under the cloak, and she gives a rundown of how it would work. She describes it as almost like, being able to tap into another world. Whereas in here, the same thing is basically just described as guided meditation. But I can see, even if I don't believe in the supernatural, I can see, viewing it as guided meditation, how it could be a powerful experience. So overall, I like both of these, of course, for different reasons. Like this, again, is way more where I am. But seeing somebody take scholarship and Old Norse texts and archaeological work and create something, new and, potentially vibrant for people, I was overall impressed with. So I did like this one quite a bit as well. And then I followed it up with this read. Now it looks thick, but it's a pretty quick read. This was a Christmas gift from some friends. These are 2 friends who actually have been kind of coming along with us, my wife and I, on this like Aethiopagan type journey. They've been wanting to participate in all the different rituals, and they've been looking up their own stuff as far as paganism. They were also sort of dissatisfied within the Christian realm. I think they maybe have recently left the church. I don't know what they necessarily call themselves at this point, but they really like this stuff. And they saw this for I think a really cheap deal online. They got it for me for Christmas. So I appreciate them doing this. It's not exactly the kind of thing that I would have picked out, but I knew that, again, it was a very quick read. I would at least like to see what other people are reading when it comes to Norse paganism. So we have 3 books in one. We have Norse magic, runes, and mythology. We got Norse paganism, and we have Norse pagan holidays. And there's a lot of overlap, especially between these two. Well, ultimately between all 3. So there's parts where it can get kind of repetitive. And what we have here is, I would say this would be a decent introduction to Norse paganism. I would say, like, for young readers. I could see, like, teenagers more being the audience for this. And I'm trying not to sound condescending when I say something like this. I say this because of the way that it's written. A lot of references are, like, to video games, assuming that a lot of the people who are coming to Norse paganism from popular culture are doing so through video games. There's a lot of video game references. That's, of course, not how I got to it. So I was assuming that we were thinking of a younger audience while reading this. And just the choices, like, if you see some of the images of the gods and goddesses, it's not at all what I would generally pick to depict them. I just had one and I lost it. Let me try and find it again. Oh, I just passed one. Here we go. So here's Tyr. They're very kind of cartoonish, almost like anime. Here's Odin. I don't know who did this art. So one of the main criticisms that I have for this, first of all, there's a lot of inaccurate information in here. A lot of the information is coming from like 90% just internet sources. There's a few books that are referenced, but they are like your basic sort of introduction to, Norse paganism or heathenry books. There's no scholarship whatsoever. So it is a night and day contrast between sources for these two things. And even in the last book, Wikipedia is one of the references. I'm a teacher. My students learn, if they don't know yet, that Wikipedia is not a reliable source. You never use it as your source. So that's the sort of thing. It's like, the value I see in this is people who are maybe not ready for college level scholarship, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. People who are just going to kind of start skimming the internet for what's out there, because by using all these websites, which are mostly, it's like the first 10 websites you would probably pop up if you did a Google search. What she has done is kind of curate that information into book form. So instead of skipping around in a bunch of web pages, you can just kind of read through and see. Now, some of the information is decent, some of it is very dubious. There's a lot of things mixed in here that have no basis at all in history, some of which the book seems to be aware of, some of which it doesn't. We have a lot of things about runes, and yes, of course, runes are historical, but we have things about bind runes, and which are not really historical, about all the different meanings of runes, how to read the runes through divination. These are all modern inventions. When she discusses the Vikings, that is a very loose term, and the history is written in a way that is, I would say, misleadingly, ultimately very much in favor of Norse culture, when it doesn't always have to be, very triumphal, and it can be very misleading. Like, at one point she talks about Tacitus, and she talks about the Vikings defeating the Romans. Oh, that didn't happen. Maybe she means the Germans. That was hundreds of years before the Vikings. So just kind of this lumping in of this term Viking in strange ways. Are you gonna come away completely with tons of wrong information? I mean, it gets more right than it gets wrong. But just as an example, in the one about holidays, we have one about Freyfaxi, and she says, the Norse folk thanked him for his gifts at Freyfaxi, and just as they did then, so should we now, because they didn't. Freyfaxi is a modern invention. It is a modern holiday created by American also true. They basically wanted something to coincide with the Wicca celebration of Lunasa, or Lammas. It's not historical, not at all, but she talks about a lot of these holidays as though they were practiced 1,000 years ago. So would I recommend this? I wouldn't recommend it, unless you are, like I said, I'm trying to sound condescending, unless you're like a teenager. If there was, a 14 or 15-year-old who was interested in Norse paganism, this might be something I'd say, hey, check this out to find out more about it. But if it was an adult, I would say there's some other sources that are going to be a lot more accurate. So anyhow, this video ended up being way longer than I expected to be, 20 minutes. But those are my thoughts on 3 pagan books that I read in January. So we've got Round We Dance, Elves, Witches and Gods, and Norse Paganism and Mythology. Yeah, as I always say, if you have read any of these, love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.